appreciate you coming out here. It's always gratifying to see a crowd like this. When you offer a program like this, you're never quite sure how many you're going to get. We do appreciate your support. We appreciate you coming out here. I would like to thank the Stanley County Museum for putting this on tonight. They are the ones who got this all together. So I would like to point out a couple things. We do have doors. They are open. If for any reason you need to leave, go during the program, certainly go ahead. They are open. Restroom facilities are in the hall behind you. And I would like to take this opportunity just to plug a couple things we have going on in the park. One is on November 2nd, it's always the first Sunday in November, we have our old-fashioned day. And it's dedicated to trying to preserve the cultural history of the area. You know, we'll have crafts, exhibits on display. If any of you have anything like that you would like to do, would like to volunteer, we would love to have you. Please call me. I'm Ron. Ask for Ranger Ron. It'll get to me, and I would love to talk to you. We would appreciate it. We would love to get some new people out here exhibiting. But if you don't want to exhibit, come out and enjoy the festivities. That will be starting at 1 o'clock Sunday, November 2nd. Another thing I would just like to kind of plug is I'm working on trying to record the history of this park. That's why I think it's so great we've got this program going on. And I know there's probably some information right here that I would like to have. You know, one of the things we're trying to do is identify the home sites, try and find about the history of this park, the CCC. There are so many things we don't know about this park. There are many things which you might think we should know or do know that we probably don't. So if you know someone or have some knowledge of the history of this park, you know, we were talking about this great facility we're sitting in. You know, this was a restaurant at one time. We have very few stories about that. We have very little knowledge about what it was actually like if you came here to Morrow Mountain and had a meal. I mean, that would be a great story. They used to have dances and events going on. All those things would be great. Just have some of those stories. You know, this park was built by the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. We have very little information. In fact, it's almost embarrassing how little information we have on that. So if you had stories, knowledge of that, we would really appreciate it. And then again, we've got quite a few home sites. I think we've identified close to 40 home sites in the park. We worked hard to locate them, and we're trying to find out the history. We know a little bit about a few of them. There's a lot of them we know nothing, little or nothing about. So if you had any of that knowledge, I would be grateful to get the opportunity to talk with you. Again, I would like to thank the museum and Ben Jolly for coming out here, so I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Ron. I'm Ken Ringler, and I'm president of the board of the Historical Society. And on behalf of the Historical Society, I want to welcome you here this evening. We are glad to see you out here. We always enjoy attendance at these events that we put on, and we certainly want to thank the rangers here at the park for allowing us to come out and use this facility, because it's just a lovely place to be. I don't have much else to say other than anybody that is not already a member of the Historical Society, there are applications on the table out here that you're welcome to pick up and take with you and mail in. And we'll be glad to have you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pat Bramlett, and she's going to introduce our speaker.
Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to thank the other members of the Education Committee, Diane Chance, Jack and Miriam Cranford, and Roger and Joan Udy, and we have new members that are going to be working with us, Kay and Richard Cosgrove on the Education Committee. So you can look forward to some more exciting things in the future. We'll keep you posted on the things that we have planned coming up. Tonight, our presenter is Ben Jolly. Ben is a Stanley County native and resident, and I'm going to have to read his job title because it's a long one. He is currently a Client Services Manager for the HealthWorks Division of Carolina's healthcare system. So that's a big title and a big job, and Ben's a busy person, and we appreciate him taking the time to come and be with us tonight. Ben attended Albemarle High School and the University of North Carolina, and if you know Ben, you know he's a big Carolina fan. He's always been involved in Albemarle and Stanley County. He once worked at the Stanley County Library, and in more recent times, he has served on the board of trustees at the library. In the early 1990s, he was a reporter and columnist for the Stanley News and Press. And in 1999, he wrote a biographical sketch of textile giant Charles A. Cannon, and it was published in a book, The North Carolina Century, which highlighted many of the influential North Carolinians during the 20th century. Ben is very involved at First Presbyterian Church. He's also on the board at the Stanley County YMCA. Ben and his wife Liz have 2 children, Catherine, who is a 4th grader, and Adam, who is a high school freshman. Tonight, his presentation will take us back to the summer of 1961. Ben, we are looking forward to your program.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody hear me? First of all, I want to say thank you to the Historical Society and the museum and to the library. I'm ashamed to say that I've not yet attended one of these presentations. I know there have been several prior to tonight, and there are going to be several more in the future. And I'm just sorry I haven't been able to attend them. I guess I had to agree to become a presenter in order to make it to one of them. I don't know that I would recommend that method, but I encourage you to continue to take part in these presentations. For my presentation tonight, first of all, I want to point out, I've been asked this question many times about the title, Parting the Waters. Where does that come from? And I cannot claim that was any cleverness on my part. I have always, I'm by no stretch of the imagination an expert or claim to be an expert on civil rights history, but it is always has been something I have been interested in and fascinated with over the years. And so whenever I'm asked by anybody, civil rights is a huge, vast topic like the Civil War, like World War II. You can't just say, hey, I want to read something on World War II. You kind of have to focus in on something. But if anybody ever asked me, Ben, what would you recommend I read about the civil rights era? And without exception, I always, next slide please, I always come back to Taylor Branch's trilogy that he did on the King years. And you'll notice this happens to be the first book that he wrote, Parting the Waters. It actually won a Pulitzer Prize in 1989, I think it was. There's no mention of tonight's story in this book. I'm just confessing that I stole the title from this book. So that's where this comes from. It was not anything. But it is interesting to note that 1961 does fall within the time period of this first installment. Next slide, please. And thanks to Ron. I appreciate you being my assistant during this. So as was said by Pat earlier, our story takes place in the summer of 1961, August to be exact. But before we delve into that, I'd like to kind of take you back and get you thinking about what was going on in the South at the time. And it kind of helps put things in perspective a little bit. And actually, it's at the end of it, you kind of come away thinking, wow, this is really an amazing story considering what was going on. Next slide. So really the signature moment for North Carolina when we talk about the civil rights movement, typically when you talk about the civil rights movement, you think about things that happened in Mississippi and Alabama, but really for North Carolina, the signature moment is the Woolworth lunch counter sit-ins, which occurred in February of 1960. You can see the counter in the Smithsonian, and I have not been, but there's a wonderful museum that I've heard about in Greensboro that has a replica of the counter, and it's a great museum to visit. I hope to get there one day. But that was sort of our signature event in North Carolina, and that's a year and a half or so before our story tonight. Next slide, please. The next thing takes us to May of '61. We have the Freedom Rides. You'll recall that those did come through North Carolina, but really didn't encounter this type of resistance. This was around Anniston, Alabama. So we're only a few months out from this Freedom Rides event. Next slide, please. Our story is about a year before James Meredith trying to enroll at Ole Miss, where you have the famous standoff between President Kennedy and Mississippi Governor Ross Barnett. Next slide. And then we're 2 years out before George Wallace in Alabama stands in the doorway at the University of Alabama. Next slide. And then we're about 2 years away from the March on Washington, which, if you know your dates, happened 51 years ago today. This is the 51st anniversary of that event. Next slide, please. And then we're 3 and 4 years away from the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, both monumental pieces of legislation that really affected a lot of huge changes in our country. So now what we have in North Carolina that was a significant event as far as our story goes was in 1960, the election of Governor Terry Sanford. Why that is significant, up until that time, most of our governors had sort of taken kind of conservative approaches, really non-existent approaches to civil rights. Governor Sanford recognized that the winds of change were blowing and that we needed to really move the state in a positive direction and really start working toward equal opportunities for all people. So next slide. In his inaugural address, he actually says, "We are not going to forget as we move into the challenging years ahead that no group of our citizens can be denied the right to participate in the opportunities of first-class citizenship." So one of the things that we will see from Governor Sanford is by the end of 1961, he will have appointed the most blacks to state boards and commissions, more than any other governor up until that point. But early in his administration, he decided that one area that he wanted to focus on was the state park system. Next slide. At that time, those of you who were around at that time remember that the state parks in North Carolina were segregated not by law but by custom and regulation. Now, I can't really speak to what it was like at Morrow Mountain. I wasn't around back then. But I do know of situations. Some of the parks in North Carolina, there were parks at the time that were considered blacks only parks, and then there were some parks that blacks could hike to the top of a mountain or hike a trail, but maybe the staff might dissuade those folks from using a facility. So there were some issues at the time where there wasn't really equality in the state park system. So this is one of the things that Terry Sanford wanted to address. This is a book that was published in 1999, written by Howard Covington and Marion Ellis. They're two former newspaper men. Ellis was at the Observer for a lot of years. Covington was, I think, at Greensboro News and Record. But they both have collaborated on a number of projects, including the book that Pat mentioned about the North Carolina Century. But this is where I found out about this story. There are a few pages mentioned in this book about Governor Sanford's time and the issues he dealt with civil rights. And so it actually mentions some meetings that occurred in 1961 between Governor Sanford. Next slide, please. At the time, his director of conservation and development was a gentleman named Hargrove Skipper Bowles, who is the father of Erskine Bowles, who you're probably more familiar with, although you probably remember Skipper Bowles ran for governor in 1972 and lost, and then later us UNC fans know him as the guy that raised all the money for the D.E. Smith Center. But back in 1961, when he was serving with Governor Sanford, this photograph was actually taken around the time of our story tonight with the integration of the pool. You have Governor Sanford here. You have Skipper Bowles here. Of course, we know this is President Kennedy here. I did not plan this. I didn't notice this. I know some of you in the audience are going to recognize the gentleman on the back row. I didn't realize it until later, but the gentleman on the far left, and they're not really part of this story, but I'm pointing it out anyway because it's North Carolina history. This is Senator B. Everett Jordan. This is Luther Hodges, who was governor of North Carolina prior to Terry Sanford and was John F. Kennedy's Commerce Secretary. And this is Senator Sam Ervin. Again, this is around 1961, so it's right around the time of our story. So we have two characters so far. We have Governor Sanford and we have Skipper Bowles as his Director of Conservation and Development. Next slide, please. This is a gentleman named Tom Ellis. Mr. Ellis, if you work in the state park system, you know the name Tom Ellis. He was a giant in the state park system, very well respected. Unfortunately, he passed away about 2006, I think. I was not able to talk to him. I wish that's the one regret I have, but he was just had taken over as the head of the state park system in 1961. Interestingly, earlier in his career, you see he was the superintendent here at Morrow Mountain from 1952 to 1955. But he was called into the governor's office, and he met with Governor Sanford and Skipper Bowles. And there was a lot of conversation about the governor wanted to try to develop a new policy that basically allowed anybody to use the state parks, and he basically wanted to rewrite the policy. So the three guys get together, and the book that I showed you earlier talks about the meetings that they had had, and I've not been able to find out, and I've asked Marion Ellis, one of the authors, how did they pick Morrow Mountain? Because Morrow Mountain was sort of a test case, okay? Morrow Mountain was the case they wanted to use, and that was based off of when I talked to Marion Ellis. They had done interviews with Tom Ellis and with Governor Sanford, and Morrow Mountain was what they wanted to use to sort of see, kind of gauge, what might happen, how folks would react. So if I had more time, I would have gone. I wish I could have gone to the state archives and gone through the governor's papers. Maybe I would have found something. So that's kind of where we are at this point. Next slide. So now we have summer of '61. Meanwhile, kind of unbeknownst to what was going on in Raleigh, we have a group of people from West Baden. Next slide, please. We have, and these are some of the names of the individuals who swam here at Morrow Mountain. These were the first folks to swim in the pool here at Morrow Mountain State Park. I've talked to a few of them. Daisy Washington, many of you know, lives in West Baden. Her sister Geraldine is in Atlanta. Very delightful person. I've talked to her several times in the last couple of weeks. Enoch Henderson is retired, living in Savannah. Mr. McPhail and Mr. Cunningham, I can't remember. I've got it's left me where they are now. Franklin Bruton is still in Baden, and Walter Davis is still in the area. And we're going to talk more about the person in this photograph in a little bit. But these folks were some of the folks. I'm not sure if they were all the folks, but these were the folks that, they decided, hey, let's see if we can go swimming at Morrow Mountain and just see what happens. I think they had talked about these kinds of things in the past, and I think it's quite remarkable when you consider some of the earlier slides that we saw, that this event happened, pretty seamlessly. I mean, they got in the water. I won't steal my surprise guest thunder, but I'll let him tell a little bit more about that. But they got in the water, they swam. It was a pretty seamless transition. Now, one thing I do want to point out is I did talk to the head lifeguard that summer in 1961 was a gentleman that some of you know named Kerry McSwain. Kerry was an Albemarle High School graduate and had a long, distinguished career in city and county government in North and South Carolina. He was the head lifeguard that summer, and I talked to him, and he said it was happened very peacefully, and You know, the only negative thing about it, and you know, it is a part of our history. Folks did get out of the water when these folks died in the water. But next slide, please. This is the first kind of mention of it locally. This was in the Stanley News and Press in August the 8th of 1961. The reason why I have this up here is that it mentions this was the first swim in. Next slide, please. This is actually a State Wire article that came out in September of '61. It ran in several different newspapers, and it actually mentions Morrow Mountain, and it mentions that there were 4 different times when blacks came to swim here at Morrow Mountain. So the reason why I had the previous slide was because if you ever read the Sanford book, it talks about it occurring in late August. So the reason why I don't put a date, I say August of '61, the consensus is that it happened sometime in August of 1961. So as a result of these individuals who I think did a brave thing, they come to swim here at Morrow Mountain and they make it happen. Next slide. As a result, at the end of the season, Skipper Bowles develops a new policy that says it is now the policy that no colored person shall be denied the use of any facility in any state park, nor shall any employee by words or action make the impression that their use is not permitted. So, the take-home message, next slide please. And that's just, and I forgot I had that one in there. A couple of years ago, I emailed Erskine Bowles to ask him if his dad had any papers or anything on this, and this was one of the things he said in the email. He told me it was his proudest story many times. It was his proudest moment because his father was very proud of that. I do know that Bowles became very frustrated in the early '60s when he was traveling through some places in North Carolina with some black people, and they couldn't eat at a restaurant because of the laws at the time. So anyway, next slide. All right, I introduce my mystery guest. This handsome man is here with us tonight. I wanted just to say the take-home message from all of this is that we had a group of citizens in our county, in Stanley County, who were a part of something, a part of an event that didn't get a lot of attention, didn't get a lot of press, but they had the courage to do what they did, and I'm sure it took a tremendous amount of courage to do what they did, and they were able to be a part of something that led to a positive change in the state of North Carolina, and it happened right here in Stanley County. So what I'd like to do now is ask this handsome young man to come forward. He is Walter Davis. Where's Walter? Where did he go? Before I turn the microphone, I've pretty much said all I'm going to say, unless you have any questions after Walter speaks. But I've really enjoyed getting to know Walter these last few weeks. I've known who Walter is for many, many years. I obviously knew him as a real estate guy. I didn't know he worked 30 years for Alcoa, but I told him that I've always really known about him because he has the same name as one of my favorite UNC basketball players. I've never forgotten who he is. So Walter, thank you very much, and please say a few words.
I met this young man a few weeks ago, and I want you to know what I'm going to have to say is not going to be as fluid as what he had to say. In December of 1959, I left A&T State University, which was A&T College at that time, because my dad had just gotten laid off from his job. His income from unemployment benefits was $11 a week. And it was difficult to find part-time work that would allow me to go to school and to work also. So I left and I joined the Army with the intentions of going back to school once I could accrue benefits from being a member of the armed forces. And about 3 months after I left school, around 3 months, the sit-ins occurred in Greensboro. And I've always felt like at that particular time, I missed out on my opportunity to be a part of the movement. Because if you were a young black person in those days, being a part of the movement was the most important thing that you could aspire to do. And the military forbade you participating in any kind of a demonstration against any kind of government entity. So when I came home in August of 1961, and I'm not sure whether it was on leave or a weekend pass, and I got in touch with some former classmates, and they told me what they were planning to do. I felt like this was my opportunity, even though if I had been arrested or something, I could have been court-martialed. So I took off my uniform and I met my friends here and we came to the park. When we got here, we went up to the counter to purchase tickets. And the young lady there was very cordial and she said, "Would you wait a few minutes?" And she disappeared. She was gone for, I'd estimate 20 to 30 minutes. And we stood there thinking, well, you know, she's hoping that if she stays away long enough, we would leave and go about our business. But we were determined we were going to wait her out. After the 20 or 30 minutes ended, 2 highway patrol cars drove up, and I thought, oh God, I'm going to jail. But they never exited the cars, they stayed there. And when we turned around, the young lady was there to sell us our tickets. And I think it was 50 cents or something like that to go swimming. We changed our clothes, went out, and you have to, I'm not gonna swear to this, but I remember thinking to myself, I wanna be the first one in that. Some of my classmates may differ with me, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. I was the first one in that pool. And when we got into the pool, all of the whites got out, and most of them stood along the edge of the fence looking at us. Some left. No one spoke to us, except for 2 little boys who came over to me and wanted to know how it was that I got so high when I dived off the board. We stayed around in the pool for a while. We had done what we came to do, so we got out and we left. Pertaining in the newspapers, anything else to it, because I guess I was back at Fort Bragg, where I was an Army paratrooper. But I remember my mother telling me that there was a small blurb about it in the paper. But as I said, I never saw any. I talked to my classmates about it when I came back, and that was pretty much it. They went home to their jobs. Someone went back to college. I went back to Fort Bragg, and we just let it fade away. And that's it. Now, I don't know if there's much more that I can add to any of that, but if you have any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them for you. Yes, Nancy?
Well, I have one observation that Ron made, my husband made, which is that we think, and Ben, maybe you can answer this also, that Walter may have been the first black African American to get into a segregated pool in all of the South. You may want to address that later, but Walter, and the other thing is, I want to know if you were scared.
I thought about that, and my recollection is I was apprehensive but not afraid. I didn't know what was going to happen. But as I said, you know, I wanted so bad to make a contribution to the movement. And if I had gotten arrested, I was willing to face whatever the Army wanted me to do. Thank you. I did have
Could be.
Did anyone have any questions for Ben?
Yeah, I saved the best for last, so if you have any questions for me? Thank you all for coming out.
The question that was asked earlier, was this among the very first integrated pools in North Carolina?
It was in North Carolina. I'm not sure about the entire South. You probably have to, I would assume that it probably was when you consider, the earlier slides I showed you, we're still 3 years away from the Civil Rights Act of '64, which dealt with segregated facilities and that type of thing. So I did not find that in my research.
And what was the history for the next 10 years? Was this a one-time, how did this lead to regular?
Well, once the policy changed, it's my understanding that you had folks were using the park system because it had been changed. It was no longer, the key issue was park staff could no longer discourage or dissuade people from using facilities within the state park system. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much. Again, we appreciate all of you being here tonight. We hope that you will follow up with Ron's information about some of the activities going on here at the park. It's a lovely place. We're very fortunate to have this park in our area. We also hope that you will attend some of our future Historical Society programs. We'll keep you posted. And most of you, I think we already have your email. If there's anyone that we didn't get your email address or you haven't given it to us before, there's sheets are outside. There's still refreshments, so help yourself to those. And we'll look forward to seeing you at another event.